young people of Zimbabwe. Greetings, my fellow compatriots. Speaking is Munashe Kalbet Masiwa, a public intellectual and the current Secretary General of the University of Zimbabwe. Today, I'm your host with a legal expert, Charity Hodzi Sibanda. Charity, you can greet my fellow compatriots and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Munashe, for the introduction. As you already stated, my name is Charity. I've been working in the development sector for, I think now it's close to 15 years. And I've been working in the area of human rights, specializing in sexual and reproductive health rights and democracy and governance and, you know, different aspects. For my CV, you can contact Say What. I'm joking. But anyway, I don't want to talk about my CV, so yeah, we can move on.
So today we are having a legal talk show anchored on the promise that was made by the government pertaining to free education. So my first question will be, what's your reflection on the access to free education and the costs involved?
Okay, Munashe, it's definitely welcomed. We know our inflation rate, as they state, is at officially 192%, up from 61% in January. And you know, salaries, we've been seeing it all on the news. You know, salaries are not commensurate with the costs for fees, and before we even talk about fees, just basic survival. The basic amount for a bread basket is now over 100,000 some dollars, and yet most are getting 21,000. And I think those who work in the homes, the helpers, typically called maids, though I prefer to call them helpers. A recent act was passed, and it's been up to about 10,000, which is not a lot of money. So as I reflect on this, it's something that I see as welcomed. But one thing that I noticed is they spoke of this being, you know, it's a basic right of education, and that they're starting with the primary schools and it's being done in phases. So I think that needs to be unpacked and understood, that what do we mean when we're saying we are phasing? There are areas that don't even have schools. Yes, there are places that don't have schools. There are places that don't have enough infrastructure. How do we intend to do that between now and then? Those were some of the questions that I was basically asking myself. And this phasing, what is it based on? Is it geographical location? Is it because we're now in a situation, I believe, where we cannot even talk of medium income earners. I think medium income earners have been eroded. People are living from hand to mouth, literally, and the challenges with teachers, we all know it's out there in the public domain, the strikes and things like that. So the questions that are there are just around then how is this going to be coined out? How are we going to phase it? How are we going to ensure that things move and work out the way that they are supposed to work out? How are we going to be looking at the most vulnerable? Are we going to be looking at it's not quite clear, but I think if that's clarified, and also is the time frame that's being given, is it enough? A time frame to say now we're getting into free basic education, but free basic education comes with the cost of, the teachers still needs to be paid.
And if there's free education, which means the number of students going to school is going to increase. So we have to increase the number of teachers too. So
exactly.
The question is, are we going to be able to pay or recruit more teachers?
Well, this is why I'm saying I believe it would be good for us to actually have a sit down. A discussion needs to happen. I'm a believer of analysis, yes, and in-depth and robust thinking, yes, first, than just jumping into something and saying, oh, because this ones did this, or because, we should also. But I do support free basic education. It's there, it's given in section 75 of the Constitution. I just want to read it out. The right to education, subsection 1. Every citizen and permanent resident in Zimbabwe has a right to a basic state-funded education, including adult basic education. And on section B, further education which the state through reasonable, and I put reasonable in a circle because I'm like, who determines reasonable?
Yes.
And legislative and other measures must make progressively available and accessible. So when I hear the term progressively, to me it's something that we're saying, okay, we're starting a journey, but it needs a timeline. And it needs a strategy as to how we are going to get to that specific timeline. But then we go to subsection 4 of section 75, where it states that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within the limits of the resources available to it to achieve the progressive realization of the rights set out in subsection 1. So already you're thinking that this right, this has always been the argument, especially when you're looking at economic, social, and cultural rights, that there's this tendency to put, progressively, and then, what is progressively, what is reasonable. We need to have something that has a timeline. We need to have something that is costed. Zimbabwe is very good at coming up with, we have very good policies on the ground, and I wouldn't be surprised if we were to look into our archives and we actually already have a policy that speaks to this. Yes. But the challenge that has always been there is that the policies are not costed. Yes. So the question that I have is, what is it going to cost the state? Because whatever cost it is has to then be put within the budget. Yes. So let's have that discussion around what it is that we're saying, what is progressive, what is phasing, where is phasing, how are we determining it, and how are we costing it.
Yes. So I also picked a point when you was talking. You said we have good policies, but they're not costed. So, in taking some nuggets from Zambia, they introduced free education and they sacrificed a lot of things like subsidies to fuel and electricity. So my question would be, are we ready to do such sacrifices? And I think you've answered that question. No, we're not ready to have such sacrifices of taxing people more. Or at least right now, most of the people in Zimbabwe are living far below the poverty line. So these are all questions in the mind of citizens, in the mind of young people, and we hope that these questions will one day be addressed. So,
sorry to just take us back a bit. By talking about the bread basket and everything, I was just saying that this is why we are welcoming this, that it's a welcomed move. Yes. But in terms of it being feasible, it does not mean that it's not feasible. Currently, we're looking at the devolution process. Yes. And if the devolution process rolls out the way that it is supposed to roll out, communities are the people. We say we're the government that has been selected by the people and for the people and
of people.
Yes. So when devolution does happen, it brings problems that are there and comes down so that we have a bottom-up approach. So what now needs to happen in terms of why I'm saying it is feasible? The questions I was just asking, I was asking based on what came out in terms of the promise. But in terms of it being feasible, if devolution takes place, when devolution takes place, communities have power to inform the budget. So communities will then be able to say, hey, instead of building 10 beer halls there, why don't we build a school here? Yes. Why don't we have a garden project that's going to help us to ensure that we are paying our teachers well, or subsidizing or adding more so that we can retain them. So I believe devolution is a very important aspect that will assist in ensuring that free basic education takes place. And I think those who are in power will understand the importance of this, given that for many, going to school was a luxury. Yes. During their time. Yes. And right now, we can see the importance of education and how education can be able to change and validate the lifestyle of a person, the way that they're going to be thinking and the way that they're going to be operating, be it as an entrepreneur or they need basic skills and basic ideas. Yeah.
So I understand that you're a legalist, and as young people, there's a misunderstanding. Most of the young people, they think that the Constitution says everyone has a right to free education. So I want you to give clarity on the difference between state-funded education and free education.
Okay. Well, a basic state-funded education, including adult basic education, means I think I equate it to free education. To education, the difference being we are putting the state as the one that is responsible to actually ensure that this takes place. And remember, the government are the people.
Yes.
So this is where the part when you were asking about issues to do with tax, etc. And I was now saying that each community now, if and when devolution happens, and let me not say if, because it's already underway, when devolution actually takes place, yes, we're supposed to see a situation where communities have got the power to be able to say, let's be able to stop this certain project and let's be able to do this a certain project. I'll give an example of Tanzania. In Tanzania, there was one specific community that were having serious challenges. The women there were having to walk miles for them to access water. And the men wanted more beer halls to be built. So the women attended the budgetary meetings that were there. And they said, you can't build more beer halls when we're having to walk 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers for us to get water. Yes. It's a burden for us. So rather than taking this money and putting it in these beer halls that you're saying will bring more money to the community, why not start by drilling boreholes and also accessing River XX and ensuring that you build these tanks that will ensure that we're able to actually access water. And it was done. So the power that the people will have in terms of ensuring that this comes as a reality in their lifetime through devolution, yes, is very possible.
So you're literally saying if there's devolution and people are committed to this free education policy, then definitely we can do it as a nation.
Yes.
Okay. So we as SAYWAT, our motto is creating a generation of healthy young people. So if you are suffering from any challenges, be it social challenges, financial challenges, be it Mujolo child, just get in touch with us. And our toll-free number is 577. So for now, I think we can take a short break. Welcome back to our second segment of the Legal Talk Show. Today we have been discussing about the promise that was made by the government, and we have agreed that we as citizens, if we are determined and if we are patriotic and we apply all the rules of devolution and so forth, we can definitely as a nation fulfill this promise. So don't forget to get in touch with us on our toll-free number 577, and please don't forget to comment below. So our third question was anchored on sexual reproductive health and GBV implications that may arise if this right to free education is denied.
Okay. I'm going to start this with by stepping into the echelons of power. As you know, in Parliament, when they discuss, there's a copy that's made, the Hunted, which shows everything that was being talked about. So research was just being done to see, you know, how many women would speak. So when Parliament, you know, takes place, people stand up and they speak. And there were some women in particular who never made their maiden speech at all. You know, a maiden speech as in your first time to even speak in Parliament. And it turned out that one of the issues was that they had not gone to primary school. So they were not able to make that maiden speech. And that is something that really touched at my heart as a woman, and also now as a woman who is educated, that this right is so fundamental. It is so fundamental, and I am happy that constitutionally it's available as well to adults. It actually talks about adult literacy, which means that if this is put in place and phased and is actually done in the proper way, we will find ourselves with all ages or all stratas that have a basic education, that can read, that can be able to navigate certain spaces. And it does not mean that these women were not intelligent at all, not at all. But the fear coming from, but I only went this far, or I never stepped through the door for school. So it's something that's extremely important. So that was a very serious gender dynamic. And if we're not careful, we are going to raise another generation where we're going to be facing the same challenges. But hope is not lost for those who are actually elderly, because this basic right is available for all. Now, coming to adding more onto the aspect of gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health rights, we know that child marriages have been, they're illegal. The Constitution states that, you should be married after the age of 18. It's now has come down into an act of parliament, and, But what happens to that young girl who was married before this came into law? And even with it coming into law, there are still people who are practicing child marriages. So not just in our culture, but even in terms of the law, when somebody gets married, even if they're 14, already they are looked at as having been emancipated. Emancipated meaning akura, akuzonera. You're now an adult because you're doing adult things. So this is where I kept asking the question, how are we going to phase this out? Because if we phase it out and we just say, okay, we're just going to look at everyone the same. We're just going to look at that's their oldest children, and all of them just attend freely. We don't really care about, those who are out there, because there are children who are out there who, I actually use the term marriage in quotes because for me it's more or less like pedophilia. And we know that when one is educated, research has shown us time and time again that their chances of survival, their chances of being able to sustain themselves become higher. And this is basic education, being able to read and write, being able to add and subtract, and the power that it would give that young girl who is in that union, in quotes, or even that young man, because they are young men as well who are in child marriages, though the percentages are lower. So as you look at that, you then see that this is something that has got serious implications on sexual and reproductive health. And with them being outside the system, this is a serious challenge, because where are they going to access information about sexual and reproductive health rights? The curriculum that's currently there looks at life skills and all, but you then learn more around sexual and reproductive health issues, things that are affecting the country, and you're able to have more decision making power and be able to have the power to leave, because for most of them it was not by choice. It could have been because of a situation, or because they were forced into it, or some religious or cultural belief. Yes. And then looking at this, when one looks at even the issue of teenage pregnancy is something that's very huge, especially in Matabeleland. You find that when it comes to child marriages, they're very high, especially in the Mashonaland areas, and highest in Epworth. Like Epworth has, I think, the same prevalence that Mashonaland Central has. And this is like more of a farming community or high density area that we've incorporated. So this is why I was saying it's important to be asking who, where, how, when, what. We need to have that, and we need to ensure that we are empowering. We need to understand that we're empowering these girls, we're empowering those who are going to tertiary institutions. We're empowering them so that they can be able to delay pregnancy. As you're at school, as you know, there's that, if you're not, that proverb, it's just escaped my mind, but an idle mind is the devil's workshop. When somebody is going to school, we saw an increase between 2020 and 2021 when there was COVID. Children were not going to school, and there was a high incidence of teenage pregnancies and child marriages. So that on its own is supposed to shake us and rattle us and tell us how important it is for there to be free basic education, which is not just basic, but accessible, meaning everywhere. In the remote areas, in the Bundu, in the Uzamba, Maramba, Pfungwa, in Binga, there, in Cholocho, wherever, we are supposed to be saying that education is there.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. And now I think we can take a short break. Don't forget to call us, get in touch with us on our toll-free number, that is 577 say what. Thank you. Welcome back to our legal talk show, where we are using a drone approach to analyze the promise that was made by the government on free education. Please don't forget to get in touch with us, say what, our toll-free number 577, and please don't forget to comment. To all young people listening to us, we have a conference in Malawi which is being hosted by SASIC. If you want to register, just go and click on our website www.sasic.org. Thank you. So our guest, our last question is now anchored on, you see, we as young people, we've been given that constitutional right to free, let me say, basic education. So with the current situation in Zimbabwe, what can be done to make sure that the government, to make sure that the state, to make sure that we, the ordinary citizen, we ensure the security of this right?
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to take you back a little, because I think this is something that's very important to note, that for you to be able to access this free basic right, which we are hoping that, where there's a will, like I always say, where there's a will, there's a way. One needs a birth certificate. And the birth certificate registrations in some areas are very low. So it can actually stifle. At times everybody wants to point up and say, hey, it's because of those people, that's why we're not able to do A, B, C, D, E. So I think one of the things that's very key in terms of ensuring that there's going to be access all around is ensuring birth certificate registration, mobile birth certificate registrations, especially in areas that are commonly known to have low birth registration. And I'll speak of some apostolic sects, and I am not going to, it's not all apostolic sects, there are specific ones. And I do think that as something that's a right, it's so important to ensure that birth registration is done so that one can be able to access the free basic education. Economically, I did talk about the issue of devolution, but as we know, for funds to be availed, it's all about the money. It's about the tax that's there. And I think there has been the burden of tax right now on the taxpayer is a lot.
Because more than 50% of budget comes from taxes.
From taxes. So there are a lot of taxes that are there. And I think it's time as a nation we sit down and re-strategize because continuous taxation will only result in not just resistance but brain drain of the important teachers that we actually need for this free basic education. So it's important to have dialogue. I'm a firm believer of dialogue, and not just any dialogue, but dialogue that is willing, because we need there to be a will. If this is real and this is serious, then we need to have willing actors that are coming together and saying, hey, how do we do this? I talked about costing, and I talked about the white elephant policies, and costing remains very important. How much is it going to be costing? How much is it going to cost to build the new schools? Who are we going to call in on board? I don't think there's any problem in getting assistance to set up or build buildings through the help of, international funders or anything. There's no problem. There's actually a lot of sustainability in that, because the building is actually then there. And it's now thinking through in terms of, as we look at our budgets, the budgetary system that's in the country, by the time the budget is made, you'll find that most government departments do not actually expand their budgets. By the time they're supposed to start operating and using the funds, you find that the time is limited because of the cycle. So what happens is there are excess funds that are usually there, and there are certain government departments that are actually known that there's this department that has underutilized these funds, there's this department that has utilized these funds. So it's about looking at that. The budget has to be looked at, the expenditure has to be looked at, and the expenditure has to be looked at with an eye that is technical, to say what is important. Where can we get, it's like in a household, you have $400 and you're thinking, what is it that we need to do? Do we pay our rentals first, or do we go to Chicken Inn?
Yes.
So those are some of the things that are going to be very important in terms of where the funds are going to be taken from. And Zimbabwe has got vast minerals. We have a lot of minerals, and I believe as long as there's a will, the way is there, and it can be sustained.
Yes. So thank you very much for your wonderful submissions and contribution to this. I think this was an educative session whereby me as an individual also learned something, that is, if the government is committed, if the citizens are committed, this promise of free education won't be just a fallacy, but it can actually happen. So thank you very much, guys, for being with us on this legal talk show. Please don't forget to get in touch with us. Say what? Our toll-free number, 577. Please don't forget to comment below. Thank you very much.